So with that in mind, East Greenwich is one of 18 districts in the state. So more than half the districts in the state fall into this category of being a base funding state. And what that really means is that by right, the Department of Ed and through the school building program will provide housing aid in the amount of 35%. What the bonuses allow you to do is potentially look at claiming bonuses in 4 categories, increasing your baseline by 50%, and which is obviously 17.5%, getting you to a potential state entitlement of 52.5%. And so this is really why you're seeing in the news, not only in East Greenwich, but statewide, why so many communities are moving now. These bonuses are due to expire at the end of this calendar year. And so really what must be done is folks need to get into the program, need to have contracts in place such that they can say they began this process with a contractor by the end of 2023 to take advantage of these funds. Then, in addition to that, in terms of making sure that people really do take this last opportunity to build now, both the House and Senate are currently considering legislation that would take your 35% and the rest of the 18 communities who have a base at 35%, elevate that to 40. You then are no longer artificially capped slightly below what would have been the maximum 20 points, because half the difference of 40 is 20 percentage points. So we would potentially be looking at receiving up to, in this case, 60% from the state. So again, any grouping of projects, should we be compliant with all of the state bonuses, you'd be receiving 60% funding from the state, leaving a mere 40% to be paid locally here in East Greenwich. In terms of how that looks, the RIDE process is set up into 5 steps. Stage 1 is something that's been completed at this point. Stage 2 is really where we are now, and it's so important tonight, and as we continue to come out to the community, that we collect your feedback, because Stage 1 really said, we understand what the need is, now we need to go do something about it. We're currently in Stage 2 and will be until September of this year, and this is really where we start to define the solution, provide cost to it, and talk to the state about what kind of entitlement or appropriation we need to make this investment. Next will come Stage 3, which is the actual physical design. Then we move into Stage 4, which is construction, and ultimately Stage 5, kind of the long-term maintenance and care of the new or renovated buildings that are completed as part of the project. So again, done with Stage 1, headed right into Stage 2, and moving towards Stage 3. In terms of, I got to look at the cheat sheet a little bit for this one. In terms of kind of charting where we've been and where we're going, this work has been going on for a few years now. And so if we look at kind of the key milestones along the way, in December of 2019, a demographic study was done to start to understand current and projected enrollment that helped set the baseline of what may be needed. Then we moved to July of 20. And we did a capacity and utilization analysis of your existing facilities. By September of 2020, we were underway and reporting out on your facilities conditions assessment, essentially an update to what Jacobs had prepared. By September of 21, we started a visioning process where there were a number of sessions held with faculty, students, the design team, educational planners about what could be appropriate should we, you as a group, as the community, make this decision to invest in education and your facilities in particular. So a lot of great work happened in some visioning sessions with the community then. By February of 2022, it was clear that we needed additional demographic information to start to project how big the schools would need to be. So that was completed. January, February timeline of 22, option development began, which is what we're going to talk about tonight in terms of options for where money may want to be spent initially. And then April through September of 2022, completed the program, continued with visioning, continued with this option development. So in terms of some quick key finding data, your average age, the average age of your buildings is 60 years. You are more than 105% over enrolled. We'll talk about your elementaries in great detail tonight, but your elementaries, the overcrowding is quite severe. Less overcrowding at the middle and high school helped to balance that overall number back down, but very, very tightly constrained in terms of elementary ed. And then minimum maintenance need, should you choose to do nothing and simply carry on, you're looking at more than $22.5 million of deferred maintenance that needs to be addressed in the fairly short term. Again, should you make no real sizable capital investment or look to do anything that creates a betterment. In terms of enrollment, you are one of the few communities, perhaps even the only one, there may be one or two others in the state where enrollment is actually slightly increasing. It may eventually plateau and level off, but you are one of the few communities. I attribute that to the success of your academic program that are actually seeing some growth. And ultimately, I think the superintendent of schools is going to talk to you a little bit tonight about the vision for these spaces, making sure that they're flexible, sustainable, inspirational, making sure that we really maximize the investment that we look to potentially spend as we go through this capital improvement program. So talking about the facilities conditions assessment itself, I'll draw your attention to the years in which everything was built. So elementary schools date to the 50s and 60s, with the exception of Eldridge. That's a 1927 building. So we're approaching its 100-year birthday. Cole recently in 2011, and high school back to 65. In terms of condition, Frenchtown receiving the worst ranking in terms of it being in poor condition and needing significant work, even just to be maintained. But elementaries all posting below average, and Cole really the only school holding the line in terms of all of these categories. A little bit about the maintenance needs. Again, these are the numbers needed to be invested in the building in terms of deferred maintenance if you were to do absolutely nothing at all. And as we start to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, probably no surprise to most people that buildings built in the 20s and then even in the 50s and 60s, not particularly friendly for folks who may require special accommodation in some way. It's really an equity issue that needs to be addressed. And then we've spent some time talking about this being a long-term understood problem in that 3 of your schools have portables. Some of them are more than 20 years old. And really what a portable is a trailer that comes up to the side of the building and is attached as typically a temporary solution because you've hit a point of overcrowding. Ideally, those last for a few years. Beyond 20, this is not a new problem, right? This is a problem that just simply needs to be addressed. In terms of capacity and utilization, this is where we really start to call attention to the elementary schools and understand just how overcrowded you are. So if I draw your attention to the 21-22 school year, 4 of your schools are in the red category. Frenchtown at 120% utilized, Hannaford at 134, Eldridge at 125. Fairly severe situation projecting out to 26, 27, approaching 150% of capacity. So something that really needs immediate attention. In terms of what happened in stage 1 and kind of like the cliff notes of what came out of that study, again, East Greenwich is one of only 4 districts of 43 in Rhode Island experiencing increased enrollment. The construction of single-family homes and turnover of single-family homes is really what's driving increases in enrollment. We've projected out that 55 single-family homes were built between 2012 and 2022. So kind of projecting out, we assume 25 new homes a year, understanding that likely we'd have 250 new single family homes come online in the next 10 years. We've also gotten a lot of questions as we've looked at this in terms of development impact. And it's really been heavily studied by both the demographers as well as Dr. Quinn, who sits on the school committee, about what really has come historically from those large multifamily developments. In terms of the Division Road project, 2 of the 400 units are single family homes. So we've taken the 200 units, plus 55 normalized, and assume a maximum of 255 new single-family homes coming online. In terms of the program review and visioning, this is what I talked about in terms of collecting data as we started to understand your existing schools. 19 visioning sessions were held with teachers and students, as well as parent groups. This happened 21 to 22. The students themselves in the high school created a proposal for high school renovations, and we'll be talking a little bit about that tonight, in fact, in more detail than we did last week at this forum. And really, stakeholders prioritized, as I've suggested and kind of hinted at, a reduction in overcrowding being needed, creating collaborative spaces, and again, that focus on investment in elementary education. So in terms of where we're headed with stage 2 and developing a solution, looking back just a little bit to January of this year, the building committee put forth the options that had been developed. March and April, community forums began, right? That's where we are now, reaching as many people as we possibly can, starting to look ahead. April, May time line, more likely April than not, school committee will in fact make a recommendation of an option that's going to be pushed forward. Ultimately, in August, the town council will submit bond language to appear on your ballot. I'll call your attention to, and the town manager mentioned a little bit earlier this evening, however, an initial action will be taken by town council this coming Monday evening, where a not to exceed figure will be established so that we can get to the legislature before summer recess. So if you're interested in kind of the funding and finance part, as well as what the kind of upper threshold may be, that's certainly a meeting that you're welcome to attend. It's a specially scheduled town council meeting, and I know will be really informative. Then looking ahead to the September to November timeframe, this is really when the application goes in. In November, you'll have the opportunity to vote. And at the end of the year, we anticipate having an approved entitlement from the state in terms of their piece of the funding, which again is likely between 52 and 60 to perhaps even 65%. And we'll talk about that next. So in terms of how we got from 35 to 52, we talked about the initial bonus program. Then we talked about the legislation that's currently being considered that brings the baseline to 40, allowing you to potentially receive 60% funding from the state. There are a number of pieces of legislation currently making their way through the House and Senate. One such bill really is a renewed focus on energy. So historically, there had been bonus incentives for high-performing schools. This sort of takes that to the next level, where basically there is a desire to get to net zero by 2050. House and Senate bills basically are calling for the decarbonization of all public schools by 2035. So this kind of builds on probably what people might be familiar with as kind of the 2030 challenge, 2035 challenge, but looking for greater moves toward broader sustainability. And essentially incentives are on the way for that. So potentially looking to capture even more state dollars, depending upon what the legislature does and what ultimately is built.